So this is my second time making a video like this, and honestly they are really not my favorite kinds of videos to make, but something really about the situation just kind of stuck with me, and I felt like I had to get my thoughts out about it. So Luke from the DM Lair, which is a fantastic channel that everyone should be subbed to, released a video about a week ago called 9 Things Pro DMs Do That You Shouldn't. The entire premise of the video is to pull various aspects from professional D&D streams like Critical Role or High Rollers and explain why you should not be doing those things in your game because it could have a negative impact on it. Before we begin, if you do like the type of content that I make here, please do consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps me out a lot. I'm getting super close to that 500 sub count mark and I'm super excited about it. I will say though that by and large I do actually agree with a lot of the points that he makes, and I even actually made my own video about this maybe a couple of months back where I asked the question if Critical Role ruined Dungeons & Dragons. Now obviously I don't think that it did, but the video was along the same lines of trying to uncover the influence, for better or worse, that these professional streams like Critical Role can have on the player base at large. The big issue that I take with a lot of the advice that he presents here is that there seems to be this unspoken assumption that does not take into account the types of games that players are playing or want to play, but rather instead he seems to be trying to kind of homogenize the game for his own definition of fun. As I mentioned in my own video about the topic, I really believe that the entire landscape of Dungeons & Dragons has changed dramatically, not only since the early editions in the 70s, but honestly even within the life cycle of 5e itself, which in a very large part is due to the increasing popularity of the game as a result of these professional streams. What people are looking for or want out of their game is likely to be very different than it was at another point in time. As I've said countless times on this channel, I think the most important thing that you can do for your table is to try your best to ensure that everybody is having fun. It's really important to have those conversations and those discussions about expectations and the types of games that people want to play at your session 0, but also throughout the course of your campaign. Every single group will have their own idea of what is or isn't fun, and not I nor anyone else should really be able to tell you what that is. And I think that's where a lot of the crux of my issues that I have with Luke's video come in. It feels like he is trying to tell us what is or isn't fun. Something else that he does throughout the video that is a little bit bizarre is that, kind of in an effort to justify his stance, he'll say that people that disagree with him about what he's saying are simply doing so because he is disparaging D&D live streams or something. But honestly, that thought never even really crossed my mind. In fact, I think he made it very clear that it's not the live streams that are the problem, it's us, the players. Alright, so now with all that out of the way, I'm going to discuss each point that he makes in his video and kind of talk about the things that I agree or disagree with. So the first one he makes is about long monologues, long narrative descriptions, and long cutscenes. So right off the bat, he states that the pro streamers are only sitting there through these descriptions for the sake of the production, which is a little bit crazy because it seems to imply that they wouldn't be if the game was not being streamed, as if they were some kind of uncontrollable toddlers. This is a pretty bold statement to lead with, and he even doubles down on it by saying that your players won't put up with it, and even more, that they shouldn't have to.
Your players in your D&D game absolutely won't. And they shouldn't have to.
I'll be honest, when I'm actually playing D&D, some of my favorite moments during the game are actually the descriptions. I love hearing about the world that I'm in, or the room, or the city and town. It kind of helps give me a little bit more cues and a little bit more information about how I, as a character, as a player character, should be interacting with those in the environment around me. Maybe I am in the minority here, but I am certain that I am not alone. It's also at this point that he makes what I think is the biggest assumption that seems to kind of resonate throughout the video and almost underscore the rest of his points, and I take a pretty big issue with it. Here's what he says.
Is that your players showed up to play a game. They probably want to play a game and not listen to you talk for minutes and minutes or longer on end, nor listen to each other talk for long periods of time where they just sit there and listen.
In a weird way, I almost resent the implication that my DM giving detailed descriptions or having engaged conversations or honestly even monologuing is somehow not part of the game. Is he trying to tell me that what I like isn't fun? You'll hear this theme kind of echoed throughout his video, and it honestly rubs me the wrong way every single time. For what it's worth though, I do agree that there is a logical limitation to this. If my 3-hour session is spent by my DM spending 2.5 hours of it describing in excruciating detail every single blade of grass, then yeah, honestly, that's gonna get pretty annoying. But that's where the ideas of trust and communication at a table really need to come into play. The second point that he makes is focusing too much on the takitaki. So I actually agree with a lot of the overarching themes that he discusses during this point, particularly that your players will certainly have a mixture of playstyles that they prefer, and I do genuinely think that it is a good idea to try your best to incorporate the three pillars of exploration, social interaction, and combat, but to be honest, some of the best sessions I have ever had in D&D have had absolutely no combat. These are sessions that have heavily relied on questions and dialogue and discovery. They can feel so rewarding because it allows your players to flex their creativity a little bit more rather than being hampered by action economy. Again, I know that my version of this does not apply to every single table, but why does he seem to think that his version should? I guarantee that there are plenty of tables that have entire campaigns built around the idea of having next to no combat and that they love it. This whole point implies that focusing too much on the takitaki doesn't actually take into consideration players' enjoyment, but rather that for an audience. The third point is not introducing players until it's the perfect moment in the story. So honestly, yeah, he has a great point here. This can be incredibly frustrating as a player if you are waiting to join a game. If you were absolutely dead set on waiting until the perfect moment, I would probably hold off on even inviting the player to join your game. But honestly, you're probably better off just finding a better way to include that player, because that's just going to be a lot more fun for everyone. Point number 4 is 3-hour fights. Honestly, yeah, he is pretty right on this one too. I especially agree that he says that there is not necessarily something wrong with these fights, provided that they weren't planned that way. I've had plenty of combats that have lasted 2 or 3 hours, but it's not like I designed them to do that, they just kind of worked out that way. If you are consistently having 5 or 6 hour long combats and it's not something which is implicitly designed as part of your campaign, then perhaps some of the balance is off, or maybe there's something a little bit wrong with your environment. But in any case, that's kind of up for you to figure out. The next point is putting the story before the game. This is largely the same as points 1 and 2, so I'm not really going to bother repeating myself too much, except to say that I still don't really understand why the story isn't part of the game to him. It honestly kind of baffles me.
For instance, you might see something like this in a D&D show. Out of nowhere, an NPC shows up, uses power word kill on a player's character, and the character is dead.
So it's kind of funny that they actually mentioned this specifically here, but I have actually out of nowhere power word killed a player in one of my campaigns before, and it actually went down really, really well. To be honest, it was probably one of the more memorable moments of the campaign, and it was done with genuine narrative reasons in mind. I really do think that these things can work if you have established a solid trust and communication base with your players. I do agree with what he says though, that you should not really be conspiring with your players to kind of accomplish something and decide something beforehand, because that really does defeat a lot of the purpose of the actual game itself. The next point is temporary characters that are designed to be killed off. This is honestly kind of a take it or leave it point for me. The issue that he raises about your players working really, really hard to keep a character alive only for them to ultimately die, in my eyes, can actually make for a really interesting story arc, but apparently the story is not really part of the game. But on the other hand, like I said, I don't think it's right to be conspiring with your players or deciding actions beforehand, so I can really see why that would become a problem. Next up is allowing PvP or high tension moments between your players. Again, by and large, he is right here. I have actually had some really interesting moments in game between player characters, but this can be something that is incredibly difficult to resolve, and the lines between player and character can blur very, very quickly, making this incredibly difficult to execute. So in general, I do agree that it's probably best to avoid it. The next point is letting players and or characters talk endlessly. Again, this is kind of the same as some of the previous points, and I've already discussed them, but again, there is a logical limit to this. If somebody never stops talking, that's obviously going to create some problems. But the main issue that he's actually brought up again here is that he has kind of separated the game from the story. However, at the same time, the DM should certainly be reading the table and really kind of ushering things along if you feel, or it's very obvious, that none of the players are really enjoying what's going on. The final point he makes is setting your expectations too high. So yeah, honestly, 100% he nails this one here. I said as much in my video, and there's not really anything I can kind of pick apart here. The bottom line here is that you can absolutely do all of these things and still have an amazing game, and that has nothing to do with you trying to be a pro DM or not. However, running the kinds of games that you do see on these professional streams does require a little bit of a different skill set and maybe even a different kind of engagement from your players. The most important thing here is having that foundational base of trust and communication with your players, otherwise it is absolutely not going to work, and I talked at length about that in my Session 0 video. So I do apologize if anything in this video came across as rude or mean-spirited. That was absolutely not the intent. I absolutely love the DM lair. There was just something about this video. So let me know in the comments down below, what do you guys think about story in your games? Do you keep it front and center? Do you kind of leave it off in the background? Let me know, I am genuinely curious.